The stars above Cadia were dying. One by one, their light was swallowed by the crawling tides of the warp, as though the heavens themselves could no longer bear witness to what was to come. Fragments of shattered void fortresses drifted across the sky like the bones of extinct leviathans, glowing faintly as their reactors bled out their final breaths into the cold dark. The Cadian Gate, the very bulwark that had held back the eye of terror for 10,000 years, stood at the edge of annihilation. I tell you this, not as an observer, but as one who remembers. And to you, yes, you listening now, we speak with care and affection, because we truly love and care for you. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. The air upon the fortress walls was brittle with frost, tasting faintly of ash. Lord Castellan Garin Vale stood at the highest parapet of Casr Mirac, his eyes tracing the black horizon where the void bled into the land. He had been a soldier all his life, yet the sight before him weighed heavier than any battlefield he had known. He could feel the end creeping closer, not in days or hours, but in heartbeats. Below, the city still bustled with the desperate order of wartime. Columns of tanks rumbled through the avenues, their engines coughing smoke into the frozen air. Regiments drilled in the courtyards under the pale glare of lumen strips, chanting the ancient litanies of the Emperor. The people of Cadia had never known peace, yet there was a tension now that was different. Not the sharp readiness before battle, but the dull, resigned dread of a world that knew it might never see another sunrise. Garin Vale had fought in the black trenches of Gethsemane, on the burning plains of Jora Prime, and in the orbital slaughter yards above Cregan's moon. He had seen fortresses crumble and fleets burn, but Cadia was different. This was not just another fortress world. This was the keystone of the Imperium's western flank, the lock that sealed the eye of terror from spilling its madness into the galaxy unchecked. To lose Cadia was to unmake 10,000 years of sacrifice. And yet, a thought gnawed at him, quiet and poisonous. Perhaps it is already lost. That thought had first taken root years ago, when strange whispers began to reach Cadia from the halo stars. Rumors of ancient pacts, of survival bought at unholy cost. Now, as the sky flickered with warp lightning and the void roared with distant battles, the whispers seemed to press closer, like cold hands at the back of his neck. He drew in a long breath, letting the icy wind scour the taste of doubt from his mouth. He could not afford to falter. Not now. His men believed in him, needed to believe in him. Faith was the mortar that held Cadia together. If the Castellans showed weakness, the walls would crumble long before the enemy breached them. A chime echoed from the Vox unit at his belt. Vale turned away from the horizon and strode across the wall to the command bastion. Inside, the air was warmer but thick with the stink of machine oil and ozone. A hololithic display flickered in the center, showing the outer defense line along the Cadian Gate. Crimson markers bled across the map, enemy incursions. Too many, too fast. Report, he said. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who had faced the abyss before. A young Vox officer saluted. Outer bastions 7 and 9 report heavy contact, my lord. Orbital platforms are under sustained bombardment. Fleet command requests reinforcement. Vale's eyes narrowed. Reinforcement was impossible. Every gun, every ship, every able body was already committed. The only way to reinforce one front was to weaken another. It was the kind of choice he hated most. One fortress saved, another doomed. As he studied the map, the air shimmered faintly at the edge of the display. A figure, tall, robed and shrouded in shadow, seemed to form for the briefest instant, then was gone. None of the officers reacted. Either they had not seen it, or they knew better than to speak of such things. Vale's jaw tightened. He had seen the figure before, in dreams, in the reflection of warped glass, in the corner of his eye during battles where death walked the trenches. The shadow was not his enemy's general. It was something older, something patient, and it had been waiting for him. "Tell Fleet Command to hold their line," Vale said. "No reinforcements. If they are Cadians, they will endure." The officers obeyed without question. Vale turned away from the display, his gaze drawn back to the black horizon. Somewhere beyond that darkness, the 13th Black Crusade was gathering, and with it came the promise of Cadia's doom. He did not fear death. He feared living long enough to see Cadia fall. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint, echoing sound of something vast, moving in the void, like the breath of a predator that had been hunting for millennia and was now close enough to taste its prey. Garin Vale closed his eyes and whispered a vow to the Emperor. He would hold the gate. He would not bend. But deep inside, in the quiet place where faith could not reach, a darker truth waited. The war was already lost, and he knew it. The memory of Cadia in its prime came to Garin Vale unbidden, like a vision painted in sharper colours than the present. The fortress world had never known peace, but in those years, war had felt almost clean. The sky had been a hard, clear blue, cut by the contrails of Valkyries on endless patrol. Castle walls stood white and proud, banners of the Emperor snapping in the wind, their gold thread catching the sun. There was discipline in every street, pride in every soldier's gaze. It had been the year of the Iron Gate War. Vale was younger then, broad-shouldered and still carrying the raw fire of ambition. He had fought alongside Marshal Cedric Sorn, his oldest friend and fellow graduate of the Cadian Scholastica Progenium. They had been near brothers, bound not by blood, but by shared battles, sleepless nights, and the unshakable certainty that Cadia was eternal. "Do you remember," Sorn had said one night, the two of them standing atop the walls of Casa Partox, "how we swore that Cadia would never fall?" Vale had smiled at the memory. "We swore it because it's true." Even then, Sorn's answering smile had been tinged with something else, a shadow perhaps, or the weight of unspoken thoughts. It's true for as long as the Imperium wants it to be. They had let that thought hang in the cold air between them, but Vale had dismissed it at the time. Sorn's mind had always been sharper than most, but prone to corners that Vale preferred not to explore. Years passed, and Cadia's glory began to tarnish. Not through defeat. Cadia had never been defeated, but through the slow corrosion of neglect. Reinforcements from Terra arrived thinner each year. Supplies dwindled. The orders from high command grew more political, less tactical, as though the defense of the gate was a pawn in some greater, hidden game. The first cracks in faith appeared when the envoys came. They arrived in ships without heraldry, bearing no imperial sigil. Their robes were plain, but their voices were rich with persuasion. They spoke not of faith in the Emperor, but of practical survival and the continuation of Cadia's legacy, no matter the cost. They were not overt in their promises, but Vale had seen their effect. A handful of Khazar-lords began making quiet preparations, relocating families off-world, diverting resources to hidden stockpiles, and building ships meant for long, unregistered voyages into the Halo stars. Sorn was among those who met with the envoys, though he never admitted it to Vale outright. One winter evening, in the officers' mess of Casa Mirac, Vale confronted him. "You've been speaking with them," he said, voice low. Sorn didn't deny it. He leaned back in his chair, eyes calm. "They have ideas worth hearing. They have no loyalty to Cadia, no loyalty to the Imperium. They have loyalty to survival, Garen," Sorn countered. "And survival matters more than banners or creeds." Vale slammed his gauntleted hand on the table, drawing startled glances from nearby officers. Survival without loyalty is just desertion by another name. Sorn's gaze didn't waver. And loyalty without survival is just suicide dressed in armor. It was the first time their words had truly cut each other. The weeks that followed were filled with a subtle, unspoken tension between them. They fought together in the campaigns against the orc warbands of the Gathic Rift, but their conversations grew shorter, their shared laughter rarer. The war never stopped, and so neither did the opportunities for the envoys to whisper into the ears of Cadia's leaders. The turning point came during the siege of Felport, a distant Casa outpost on the southern hemisphere. Chaos Raiders had broken through the void screen and were burning their way toward the civilian districts. Vale's plan was simple. Hold the walls, wait for reinforcements from the 85th Armored. But Sorn had other orders in hand. Orders to pull back and consolidate at Casa Vex, sacrificing Felport entirely to preserve forces. "They'll die," Vale said, staring at the blinking orders in disbelief. "They'll die if we stay too," Sorn replied. "This way, at least some will live." Vale ignored the orders. He stayed. His regiment fought until the 85th arrived, and Felport held, but at a cost of nearly half his men. Sorn followed his own orders and saved his forces, though the bitterness between them deepened like a fracture in a fortress wall. When they returned to Cadia, Vale noticed more and more ships departing in the night. Not military vessels, private freighters, repurposed bulk haulers, anything that could disappear into the deep void without drawing attention. Sorn did not speak of them, but Vale suspected he knew more than he let on. In the heart of Cadia's military command, beneath the marble and steel of the governor's hall, Vale found a sealed chamber that was not on any official registry. Inside, he found crates of provisions, stacks of weapons, and star charts marking routes beyond the Eye of Terror's reach. None of it bore imperial insignia. All of it was meant for an exodus. That night, the two men met again on the fortress walls, just as they had in their youth. But this time, the wind was colder, the silence between them heavier. "Do you still believe Cadia will never fall?" Sorn asked, his voice unreadable. "I believe," Vale said slowly, "that if it does, it will be because men like you prepared for it to happen." Sorn's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. The rift between them was no longer a hairline crack. It was a gulf. The years ahead would see that gulf widen until there was no bridge left to cross. The storms came first. Not the warp storms that every Cadian child was taught to fear, but the silent, glassy tempests of the halo fringe, rolling waves of aurora-like light that bent starlight into strange, shifting patterns. They swept over the Cadian gate like phantom tides, shimmering one moment, vanishing the next. Lord Castellan Garen Vale stood in the observation gallery of the fortress ship Iron Bulwark, watching one such wave ripple across the void. The sight was eerily beautiful, but wrong. It reminded him of a wound that had healed badly, scar tissue stretched too tight over something that still festered beneath. It was during one of these storms that the unmarked ship appeared. No transponder, no voxhail, no escort. It emerged from the shifting light as if it had been hiding there all along. Its hull was the color of old bone, etched with patterns that did not match any Xenos or human design, Vale knew. It slid through the void without so much as a flare of engine wash. "Shall I signal the fleet?" asked Lieutenant Drevar, his young adjutant. "No," Vale said, narrowing his eyes. "I want to see where it goes." It went nowhere. Instead, it stopped, hung there in space, as if waiting. Moments later, a single shuttle detached and began a slow descent toward Casa Mirak's landing spire. By the time Vale arrived planetside, the visitor was already in the governor's hall. The guards at the entrance stood as still as statues, their eyes glassy and unfocused. Vale felt a pulse of unease in his chest, like the faint echo of a distant drumbeat. The envoy was tall, taller than any mortal man, and robed in deep grey cloth that seemed to drink in the light. No face could be seen beneath the hood, only a faint gleam where eyes might be. When it spoke, the voice was layered, a chorus, whispering in perfect unison. "I am here," it said, "to speak of the inevitable." Governor Myrak shifted uncomfortably in his seat at the great marble table. "The Imperium holds the gate, always has, always will." The envoy's head tilted slightly. Always. Such a brittle word. You have seen the stars above you dim. You have heard the guns of your orbital bastions shatter. You know, deep in your marrow, that the end comes. Vale stepped forward. "If you have business here, speak it plainly. What do you want?" The envoy turned toward him, and in that instant, Vale felt as though the air had been pulled from the room. The layered voices dropped to a near whisper. "I want nothing. I offer survival." Those words were followed by silence, long enough for the hum of the chamber's lumen strips to become a rasp in Vale's ears. The envoy spoke again. "When the eye opens, when the tides break, there will be no victory. Only those who are prepared will endure. I can take you to a place where the Emperor's enemies cannot follow, but such a gift requires a cost." "What cost?" Governor Myrak asked, his voice trembling. The envoy's hood turned slightly toward him. "To abandon this rock and all its ashes. To save your people, not your pride." Vale's jaw tightened. "And in this place, would we still serve the Emperor?" The envoy's answer was a slow, deliberate pause. "You would serve survival." That was enough for Vale. "Get out." The hooded head turned back toward him. "You speak for all of Cadia, then?" "I speak for those who still have a spine," Vale said coldly. The envoy seemed to study him. Then it inclined its head a fraction, the faintest suggestion of amusement, or perhaps pity. "Then you will die with your spine intact, but you will still die." Without another word, the figure left the hall, moving with unhurried grace. The guards at the entrance blinked and straightened as if waking from a dream. No one could later recall seeing the envoy board the shuttle, nor the shuttle depart. The bone-white ship was simply gone. That night, Vale found Sorn waiting for him in his private chambers. The firelight threw deep shadows across his friend's face. "You should have listened," Sorn said quietly. Vale froze. "You knew they were coming." Sorn didn't answer the question. "There's a storm coming that no fortress will stand against. You think the Imperium will save us? They will leave us here to burn." Vale's voice was low and dangerous. "You've been speaking with them." Sorn stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking about Cadia's future, and about yours." There was a long silence between them, the kind of silence that could turn into violence with a single wrong word. Finally, Sorn walked past him and toward the door. "When the time comes," he said without looking back, "I'll make the offer again. Pray you're wise enough to take it." Vale didn't move. He only stared out of the narrow window slit at the night sky. The halo storms were brighter now, their shifting light crawling across the stars like a living thing. Somewhere beyond them, the bone-white ship was still waiting. The twin moons of Baal hung heavy in the darkening sky, their pale light washing the red deserts and jagged cliffs in a ghostly glow. Winds carried with them the dry tang of scorched stone, whispering like ancient spirits across the wastes. In the heart of the Blood Angels' fortress monastery, the Sanctum Angelicum, the great vaulted halls were silent, save for the echoing footsteps of Sanguinius himself. The Angel of Blood walked alone, his wings brushing faintly against the carved obsidian walls. His mind was troubled, his steps measured. Reports from the outlying settlements spoke of strange phenomena. Dust storms of unnatural duration, stars flickering in the sky, and travellers speaking in hushed tones of shadows moving against the wind. What concerned him most were the dreams. For weeks now, he had been plagued by visions, a black tide consuming worlds, a crimson sun bleeding out its light, and a familiar voice calling from the void. "Brother, it begins." He knew the voice. Horus. The council convenes in the Grand Strategium, the chapter's highest officers gathered. Dante, newly promoted to commander of the third host, stood beside veterans whose armour bore the scars of centuries. Sanguinius addressed them with calm authority, though his eyes betrayed the weight of unspoken fears. "Brothers," he began, his voice carrying like a hymn through the chamber, "the galaxy stirs with unrest. The great crusade advances, yet shadows grow in the wake of our victories. We are being watched." One by one, the officers relayed their intelligence. Reports of enemy war bands drifting too close to Imperial shipping lanes, disappearances of scouting parties on the fringe worlds, even rumours from the Ialda Mechanicum of fragmentary machine signals, coded transmissions in dialects not heard since the dark age of technology. Captain Ralderon leaned forward, the crimson plates of his armour gleaming under the hololithic maps. "My lord, there is more. The astropaths whisper of a great storm in the warp, building far beyond our current routes. If it swells further, it will cut us off from half our supply lines." The council fell silent. Warp storms were unpredictable and dangerous, but one growing now, in the middle of the Crusade's expansion, reeked of something deliberate. A warning from Terra. Hours later, as the council dispersed, a secure astropathic communique arrived from the Imperial Palace itself. The sigil of the Emperor burned upon the parchment seal. Sanguinius read the encoded words in solitude. "My son, I sense unrest among your brothers. The great work nears its final phase, but all is not well. Trust your instincts, yet tread carefully. The enemy moves within and without, though their face remains hidden. Do not speak of this to Horus, not yet." The message struck him like a spear through the chest. Why should he not speak to Horus, his most trusted brother? And why would the Emperor suspect unrest among the Primarchs themselves? He knew only that if the Emperor suspected disunity at such a critical time, then the danger must be far greater than he had imagined. An ominous omen. That night, Sanguinius stood upon the fortress battlements, gazing across the endless wastes of Baal Secundus. The wind was sharp, carrying with it the smell of an oncoming dust storm. He closed his eyes and felt it. A presence. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the brush of a shadow against his mind. It was cold, and yet not entirely alien. When he opened his eyes, he saw them, out on the far horizon, figures standing in the dust, watching. They were distant, yet their forms were unmistakably wrong. Too tall, too thin, their outline shifting as if they were not fully real. When he blinked, they were gone, but the dread remained. The blood trial. To test his warriors and purge any weakness, Sanguinius ordered the blood trial, an ancient Baalite rite. Under the crimson moons, aspirants and battle brothers alike faced challenges of strength, endurance, and spirit. Yet in the middle of the trial, one of the aspirants collapsed, writhing on the red sands. His eyes rolled back, and in a voice not his own, he spoke. "Angel, the serpent coils around your heart. Your brightest star will fall first." The words chilled every warrior present. The aspirant died moments later, his body withered as though decades had passed in an instant. The decision by dawn. Sanguinius knew he could not ignore the signs. The Emperor's warning, the omens, the shadows, these were not coincidence. War was coming, though its true form had yet to reveal itself. He ordered the blood, angels' fleets to full readiness. Recon ships were sent to the edge of the warp storm to chart its growth. Elite strike teams were dispatched to investigate the vanishing settlements. And deep within the Sanctum Angelicum, the librarians began forbidden psychic scryings, searching for threads of fate too dangerous to leave unseen. As Sanguinius prepared for the trials ahead, he felt the first true pang of unease. His visions had always been both a blessing and a curse, but now, more than ever, they felt like a countdown. Something terrible was coming for the Imperium, and perhaps for him. The outermost bulwarks of the Imperial Palace had already been reduced to smoking rubble, and the once pristine marble causeways were now littered with wreckage, the corpses of warriors and the twisted husks of war machines. The air itself was choked with ash, its every breath a rasping torment. Thunderhawks and stormbirds screamed overhead, trading fire with the black-winged craft of the traitors. Beneath their shadows, the full weight of the war pressed against the Eternity Wall gate, one of the last great arteries into the palace proper. The gate was a work of unmatched craftsmanship, wrought by the Emperor's own artisans in the first days of the palace's construction. Now it was scarred, pitted, and cracked, its gold inlay blackened by meltagun bursts, its once immaculate heraldry marred by the icons of chaos daubed in blood. From the traitor legions' lines came the roar of siege engines, the crash of titanic shells that made the ancient stones quake with every impact. The defenders atop the battlements fought with grim resolve, but the toll was undeniable. Men who had sworn their lives to the throne were dying faster than they could be replaced. Sigismund, the first captain of the Imperial Fists, stood at the heart of the defense. His black and yellow armor was caked in gore and dust, his power sword humming with caged fury. Around him, his Templar brethren held the walls with an unbreakable line, their shields locking together in a fortress of ceramite and faith. Each word Sigismund spoke was a command, each command a promise, that no traitor would pass while he yet drew breath. Yet the enemy pressed ever harder. The World Eaters, driven to apocalyptic frenzy, hurled themselves at the gates in unending waves, their chain axes shrieking as loudly as their voices. Behind them came the Iron Warriors' siege lines, methodical and relentless. Perturabo's engines tore great chunks from the masonry, creating footholds for the swarm. It was the unity of sheer rage and cold engineering, a union only possible under the banners of treachery. From the far western wall, Vox reports screamed of breaches. The defenders were stretched thin, too thin. Sigismund knew the truth. The Eternity Wall Gate would not hold indefinitely. It could not. But every heartbeat they bought was another heartbeat for Rogel Dawn to strengthen the inner sanctums. Another heartbeat for the Emperor to continue his unseen work upon the Golden Throne. The battle at the gate reached a fever pitch when the Khorne berserkers smashed through the outer barricades. Sigismund was there in an instant, his blade carving arcs of light through the dust. Blood sprayed across the gate's marble floor, pooling in the engraved aquilus underfoot. Brother after brother fell at his side, but their formation did not break. When one Templar died, another stepped forward into his place, shield raised and vow renewed. From the enemy lines came the guttural laughter of Khan the Betrayer. The infamous champion of the World Eaters cut a crimson path toward Sigismund, his gore-child chain axe sending fountains of gore with every swing. The two champions clashed in the shadow of the gate, Sigismund's measured precision against Khan's brutal abandon. Sparks flew, armor split, and for long moments neither gave ground. Around them, the battle slowed, as though both armies paused to witness the duel. Khan's strength was monstrous, each strike of Gorechild hammering against Sigismund's guard like the wrath of a god. Yet Sigismund endured, his defense unshakable, his riposte biting deep into the berserker's armor. At last, with a roar, Khan forced Sigismund back a pace, then another. The gate groaned under another barrage from Perturabo's artillery, and with a deafening crack, part of its massive frame splintered. Both warriors knew what that meant. The enemy would pour through. Sigismund disengaged, bellowing orders for his men to fall back to the inner choke points. Khan surged forward, but a volley of heavy bolter fire forced him to pause, roaring curses. The defenders withdrew step by bloody step, shields still locked, even as the traitor hordes swarmed the shattered outer doors. Blood ran like rivers down the causeway, staining the flagstones deep crimson. By the time the defenders sealed the inner portcullis, the Eternity Wall Gate was lost. The enemy banners rose over its ruins, the eight-pointed star flapping in the toxic wind. Sigismund stood at the next barricade, chest heaving, armor dented and dripping with gore, but his eyes burned with defiance. They had given ground, yes, but the palace still stood, and as long as it stood, the war was not yet lost. The citadel's black spires jutted against the dying light of a blood-red sun, casting shadows that seemed to stretch far beyond their stone foundations. In the high war room, maps of the galaxy lay unfurled, littered with crimson markers, each one a wound inflicted upon the Imperium's once unbroken body. The silence was thick, save for the occasional scrape of parchment or the distant wail of wind through the broken halls. Sanguinius stood before the great window of obsidian glass, gazing upon the battlefield far below. The war had dragged on for years now, and its toll was etched into the hollows of his face, into the dull gleam of his once radiant eyes. His wings, those symbols of hope and divinity, now bore scars and tattered feathers, the pure white touched with soot and dried blood. At his side stood Azkael, first captain of the Blood Angels, a warrior forged in loyalty, but one who could no longer keep his doubts hidden. "My lord," Azkael said at last, voice low, "our forces cannot hold another week. Supplies are dwindling, and the men—" He paused, the weight of the truth choking his words. "The men are losing faith." Sanguinius did not turn to face him. "Faith is the only currency we have left, Azkael, and we must spend it wisely." Azkael's jaw tightened. "And when that currency runs out?" Will we tell them to fight on in the dark, without even the illusion of hope? For a long moment, the angel of blood was silent. Then, with a sigh heavy enough to crush iron, he turned. If hope dies, then we must become its shadow. Hope does not always come in the light. It is often born in darkness, in defiance. The war room's heavy doors swung open, and into the chamber strode Commander Varys, his armor still marked with the grime of the battlefield. He saluted, though his stance was weary. "My lord, scouts report a movement in the southern passes, Mechanicus forces, bearing the sigil of Mars, advancing under heavy escort." Azkael frowned. "The Mechanicus? We requested aid from them cycles ago. Why now?" "They are not here for us," Varys said grimly. "Their engines march towards the vaults beneath the city, the Titan vaults." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended by a fraying thread. Sanguinius moved to the table, fingers brushing the faded ink of the war maps. "If they seek the vaults, then they seek the god machines. They will not allow them to fall into the hands of the War Master, nor ours." Azkael stepped forward. "We cannot fight the Mechanicus and the traitors both. If they intend to secure the Titans, we should—" "No," Sanguinius interrupted sharply. "If the Mechanicus takes those engines, they will use them to decide this war in ways we cannot predict. If the War Master gains them, all is lost. We will intercept them." That night, under the cloak of a storm that turned the skies black, the Blood Angels descended into the Undercity. The tunnels leading to the Titan vaults were carved from ancient stone, their walls etched with faded runes from the dark age of technology. The air was cold and wet, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence. It was here, in these tomb-like corridors, that Sanguinius felt the first stirrings of unease. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to hum, low, almost imperceptible, like the breath of something sleeping far below. They reached the vault doors just as the Mechanical's forces emerged from the opposite passage. Their leader, a Magos Dominus named Zithran, was a towering figure swathed in crimson robes, his flesh more metal than man. Mechanical tendrils writhed from his back, each tipped with instruments of war and analysis. His voice was a metallic hiss. "Sanguinius, the vault is not yours to guard. It belongs to the Omnissiah." "It belongs to no one," Sanguinius replied, stepping forward. "It is a weapon, and weapons decide the fates of worlds. In the wrong hands, it will bring only ruin. In any hands," Zithran corrected, "it brings ruin. That is the nature of power." Negotiation was brief and fruitless. The Mechanicus were bound by their own oaths and logic, the Blood Angels by desperation. The clash came without warning, bolter fire ripping through the stale air, the sharp tang of ozone filling the vault antechamber. Azkael fought like a lion, cutting down red-robed Skitarii with sweeps of his power sword. Varys' storm bolter roared, the muzzle flash lighting his grim face in staccato bursts. And then the vault door began to open. No one had given the command. No Mechanicus key or Blood Angel code had been entered. Yet the seals broke, one after another, and the ground shook with a deep, resonant growl. A light poured from the widening gap, not the clean light of machinery, but a red, pulsing glow like the heart of a beast. Sanguinius felt it before he saw it, a pressure in his skull, a whisper curling in the back of his mind. "Child of the Emperor, open the way." The voice was ancient, heavy with malice and promise. He fought it, but it pressed against his will, its cadence almost hypnotic. Around him, even his warriors faltered, their eyes briefly clouding. The glow brightened, revealing the silhouette of a titan, but unlike any he had ever seen. Its form was twisted, almost alive, its plating marked with symbols older than the Imperium itself. The thing exuded a presence, not merely mechanical, but aware. Zithrin recoiled, his mechanical limbs twitching. This is no god machine of the Omnissiah. This is forbidden. Sanguinius's voice was low and grim, and yet it wakes. The Mechanicus broke their attack. The vault began to tremble as if the very stone walls feared what lay within. Sanguinius gave the order to seal the chamber again, but the mechanisms shuddered and ground to a halt, as if resisting him. The voice returned, sharper now. "Let me walk the stars again, and I will give you victory." Ascael looked to his lord, eyes wide. "What is it, my lord?" Sanguinius did not answer. His gaze remained fixed on the monstrous silhouette within the vault, its single burning eye watching him in return. He knew then that this war was no longer fought merely between men and traitors. Something older had taken an interest. An interest in the galaxy's darkest corners was never a blessing. The red bastion stood as the most formidable fortress on the ash world of Belmora, its blood-hued walls rising like jagged teeth against the storm-darkened sky. Built in the days of the Great Crusade, it had once been a proud outpost of imperial might. Now, under the banners of the traitor legions, it had become a citadel of defiance, a dagger pointed at the heart of the Loyalist campaign. The wind howled across the barren plains, carrying with it the scent of Prometheum fires and the stench of the dead. For 3 months, the Loyalist forces had encircled the bastion, their siege lines stretching in a great crescent of steel and earthworks. Yet, for every trench dug and barricade raised, the defenders responded with iron discipline and unyielding fury. At the forefront of the assault preparations stood Lord Commander Selvius Marek, a man whose armour bore the scars of 100 campaigns. His face was hard as ceramite, his eyes colder than the void. Marek knew that breaking the Red Bastion would not simply be a victory. It would be a message to every world still wavering in the shadow of the heresy. "Their guns still rake our forward lines," Marek said, his voice a low growl as he studied the hololithic display in the command dugout. "We move at dawn. No more probing attacks. We break them, or we die on their walls." The officers around him nodded grimly. They knew the price such an assault would demand. The dawn assault, the siege began with a thunderous symphony of artillery. Basilisk batteries and Medusa siege guns roared in unison, sending shockwaves through the air. Shells slammed into the bastion's outer curtain, shattering battlements and throwing defenders into the air like rag dolls. Yet, for every section of wall that crumbled, the traitors poured lasfire and bolter shells into the breach, turning rubble into killing grounds. From the east, the sky talons of the 47th Drop Regiment descended through flak-filled skies, their grav chutes carrying squads into the bastion's inner courtyards. Some made it, many did not. The defenders' anti-air batteries tore the skies with incandescent streaks, turning soldiers into burning streaks of falling light. Marek's own command squad led the armoured push, Lehman Russ battle tanks grinding over the shattered terrain. Their heavy bolters and demolisher cannons barked with relentless fury, silencing gun nests one by one. Yet the Red Bastion was a fortress born from the genius of imperial architecture, and such genius was hard to kill. The wall breach. By midday, a breach was torn in the north wall, wide enough for infantry to pour through. The moment they did, the real battle began. close-quarter slaughter amidst the dust and ruin. Chainswords revved, las blades flashed, and the thunder of bolt pistols cracked in the narrow corridors. The traitors fought like cornered beasts, their armor blackened by soot and their faces twisted with hatred. Marek cut his way through a choke point, his power sword blazing with arcs of blue lightning. He moved with the precision of a man who had killed so many times that death was muscle memory. Around him, the Loyalists advanced step by bloody step. The Bastion's defenders counterattacked without hesitation. At one point, a squad of iron warriors in spiked plate crashed into the breach, their chain axes roaring. The melee became a storm of sparks and screams. Marek met their champion in single combat, a towering brute wielding a siege maul. The blow that came for Marek would have caved his chest in, but he turned it aside with a sweeping parry and drove his sword through the traitor's helm. The iron warrior fell, and his men broke under the renewed charge. The heart of the Bastion hours of brutal fighting brought the Loyalists to the central command tower, the heart of the Red Bastion. Here, the enemy commander waited, Captain Valer Thask, a former Imperial hero turned warlord. His crimson and iron armor gleamed despite the grime, his helm adorned with the horns of some long-slain beast. "You think you can take my fortress, Marek?" Thask bellowed, his voice echoing in the shattered chamber. "I built these walls with my own blood. I will die before I surrender them." "So be it," Marek replied. Their duel was short, violent and final. Marek's blade shattered Thask's guard and drove deep into the traitor's chest. As Thask fell, the Bastion seemed to exhale, the battle's fury fading into a stunned, death-filled silence. Aftermath. By nightfall, the banners of the Imperium flew once more from the Red Bastion's towers. Fires burned in every courtyard, casting long shadows over the heaps of dead. The surviving defenders were marched out in chains, their faces pale and hollow. Marek stood atop the wall, staring out over the battlefield. The price had been steep, too steep. Thousands lay dead in the mud, their blood mixing with the rain, and yet the war was far from over. Beyond the horizon, more strongholds waited, each one a monument to defiance. The Red Bastion had fallen, but Marek knew in his bones that victories in this war would always taste of ash. The great forged cities of Mars did not sleep. Even in the deepest hours of the Martian night, the air was thick with the low thunder of foundries and the ceaseless chant of Binharik Kant. Towers of brass and adamantium speared into the smog-choked sky, crowned with rivers of molten metal that fell like burning rain into cyclopean crucibles. For millennia, this endless labor had served the Imperium, feeding its armies and powering its fleets. Yet now, the song of the forges was subtly changing, an unseen hand altering the rhythm. Within the cathedral forge of Lucius Magna, Archmagos Routhvale stood at the precipice of decision. The air shimmered around him with the heat of plasma furnaces, while his mechadendrites writhed with nervous calculation. His crimson robes were blackened at the edges, scorched from the tests he had conducted in secret. In the sanctum behind him, a thing older than the Imperium itself stirred, half buried in a cradle of cables, its vast silhouette framed by shadows and rune light, the Oblivion Deus, a titan whose true designation had been erased from Mechanicum records long before the coming of the Emperor. No loyalist Magos should have dared awaken it, for it bore the mark of the warp in its machine code. And yet, Routhvale could not resist. Its voice had reached him through static and dream alike, promising strength beyond all reckoning. The first whispers had been faint, numbers repeating in the corner of his mind, patterns within patterns. They had come to him during rites of maintenance, when his mind was supposed to be one with the Omnissiah. At first, he dismissed them as the ghost code of ancient systems, but they persisted, growing clearer, until he could almost make out the tone of the speaker, neither human nor holy machine. The Oblivion Deus offered him visions. He saw the forged cities burning in glorious rebellion, saw Mars casting off the yoke of terror. He saw the Titans stride through the ruins of the Imperial Palace itself, its weapons singing hymns to the Dark Mechanicum. And at the center of it all, he saw himself, no longer bound by flesh or duty, but a god in steel and fire. Yet, as intoxicating as the vision was, Routhvale hesitated. The Adeptus Mechanicus was divided, yes, but the fracture lines were not yet beyond repair. Already, Magos Dominus Carvex suspected his loyalty. Already, the more pious sects muttered about the strange fluctuations in Lucius Magna's energy usage. The wrong move, and he would be purged in a sanctified firestorm before his work could be completed. Still, the voice would not be denied. Tonight, it had grown stronger than ever before, pressing against the edges of his thought until the words spilled from his vox grill unbidden. I am waiting, Magos. My core sleeps, but the lock is yours to break. Speak the sequence, and I shall rise. Routh's mechadendrites twitched, as if they too could hear it. With deliberate calm, he keyed a sequence into the runic panel before him. Servitors in the chamber stirred, their augmetic eyes glowing as they rerouted power from the forges to the Titan sarcophagus. Somewhere deep within the massive machine, a sound like a heartbeat began, a slow, echoing thum resonating through the floor. The Oblivion Deus was waking. But then another voice intruded, one Routh had not expected. Archmagos, came the filtered tones of Magos Carvec, speaking through the sanctum's vox channel. Why is Lucius Magna's output dipping? You are drawing reactor power without authorization. Routh's mind raced. A minor systems recalibration, he lied, preparing for deep field operations. Carvec's tone sharpened. You are not on the deployment roster. Cease your experiments, or I will bring this to the Fabricator General himself. The Titan's voice hissed in Routh's mind. He will not understand. He will chain you to the old ways. Remove him. For a heartbeat, Routh considered compliance, but the vision of himself, ascendant, supreme among the Dark Mechanicum, flared in his mind. He spoke into the vox. Your interference is noted, Carvec. I will address it shortly. Then, with the cold precision of a man who had surrendered his morality long ago, he sent a command. In the foundry, 2 levels above, an automated manipulator arm, guided by his will, swung a 20-ton slab of still molten ceramite directly into Carvec's platform. The vox channel erupted in static, then fell silent. The Titan purred. The chamber's rune lights shifted from gold to a deep, ominous crimson. One by one, the locks upon the Oblivion Deus disengaged with a hiss of pressurized steam. Vast pistons groaned, and the Titan's head, like the skull of some ancient, forgotten god, turned toward Routh. You have done well, my herald, it whispered. Now, let me show you the true song of the forges. In the depths of Mars, beyond the site of the Loyalist Mechanicum, the ancient war engine took its first breath in 10,000 years, and in that breath, the doom of the Red Planet was sealed. The heavens above Caliban churned with storms unseen for millennia. Black clouds swirled in unnatural patterns, drawn into the heart of the capital like the pull of a great vortex. The fortress monastery of the Dark Angels, once a beacon of strength and unity, now stood as a grim silhouette against the tempest, its spires clawing at the sky like the fingers of some dying god. Lion L. Johnson stood upon the battlements, his gaze fixed upon the horizon. His eyes, once clear and piercing, now carried a shadow that no mortal light could dispel. Reports had reached him, fragmented, frantic whispers from patrols, that the great forests were stirring. Entire groves shifted in the night. The beasts, long dormant since the unification, had begun to reappear in numbers. Some claimed these were no mere creatures of fang and claw, but warped and unnatural horrors, their forms shaped by sorcery. The lion's jaw tightened. It was not only the forest that was stirring. Luther's forces, those loyal to the man who had once been his father figure, were growing bolder. Outposts once under imperial command had gone silent. Garrisons had vanished without a trace. In the space of months, the outer provinces had fallen into Luther's grip. The High Council chamber of the monastery was silent save for the crackle of the storm. Around the great circular table sat the lion's most trusted captains. Their armor bore the scars of countless battles, yet their faces told of a deeper war, a war of loyalty, of brothers divided. Luther's words spread like rot, said Captain Zahariel, his tone low and bitter. He speaks of freedom, of throwing off the chains of the emperor. Men believe him, my lord. They see him as a savior. A savior, the lion repeated, his voice almost a whisper, or a serpent. It was Brother Sergeant Alaric who broke the tension. He does not merely seek power. He seeks to undo all we have built. And worse, he knows our tactics. He knows our minds. We cannot fight him as we would an outside foe. The lion turned away from the table, walking toward the great window that overlooked the capital. He was my brother once, my friend. I trusted him above all others. The words hung in the air like a confession. Then steel entered his voice. But trust does not stop a dagger when it is aimed at the heart. Beyond the walls, the first signs of siege began to manifest. Watchtowers lit their beacons. Messengers arrived breathless, bearing news of enemy warbands moving into position. The monastery's outer defences were braced, yet the true battle was already being fought in the minds of those within. In the deepest vaults, the librarians spoke in hushed tones. They had felt a psychic pressure, a constant whisper that gnawed at the edges of their thoughts. Some feared it was the warp itself bleeding into the world. Others suspected Luther had found allies beyond mortal ken. When the lion finally addressed his captains, his voice carried the weight of a man who had already buried too many dreams. We hold the capital. We hold the monastery. But we will not wait for the enemy to come to us. We will cut out this infection before it festers beyond our reach. The captains saluted, but as they left the chamber, whispers followed in their wake. Could even the lion defeat Luther now? Could the bonds of brotherhood, once severed, ever be reforged? That night, the lion stood alone in the Hall of Blades, where the weapons of the chapter's greatest heroes were displayed. His hand brushed the hilt of his own sword, its edge gleaming in the torchlight. He had faced Xenu's warlords, demonic beasts, and the worst horrors of the galaxy, but never had his enemy been a man who once shared his heart. Outside, thunder split the sky. The storm was no longer a thing of weather. It was the herald of war. The skies above Mars bled crimson fire as the Iron Spire, the ancient nerve center of the Forge's heretical rebellion, stood defiant against the might of the loyalist war hosts. Once a beacon of the machine god's authority, Its great metallic flanks now bore the scars of ceaseless bombardment, and from within its hollowed frame, the corrupted sermons of the Omnissiah's betrayers rang out like poison-laced hymns. The Loyalist forces had assembled for this day for months. Titans of the Legio Invicta, their adamantine limbs shrouded in dust storms, advanced at the forefront, their steps shaking the steel bones of Mars itself. Behind them came the Skitarii cohorts, rank upon rank of augmented warriors, their chants merging with the machine psalms of the Titan crews. Overhead, the skies were blackened by the contrails of the Mechanicus, fleet, their orbital cannons primed to turn the spire into molten slag. Magos Dominus Calric, his mind wired directly into the Loyalist command grid, stood at the warfront within the belly of his Ordinatus engine, his voice carried across voxnets to all regiments. By the will of the Omnissiah, this rebellion ends tonight. No fragment of the heretic creed will survive. Purge the spire, purge them all. Inside the Iron Spire, the enemy prepared their last stand. Arch-heretic Varzun, the architect of the rebellion, oversaw the rites of corruption that bound the spire's machine spirit to the warp. The great iron cathedral was now more demon than structure, its walls pulsing with unholy resonance, the ground trembling as the entity within strained against the last vestiges of reality. Varzun's followers fought with fanatical zeal, their mechanical limbs dripping with molten oil, their minds enslaved to the will of the dark mechanicum. The battle began with a thunderous volley from the Loyalist Titans. Volcano cannons roared, stripping the spire's outer battlements into rivers of molten metal. Skitarii stormtroopers advanced through the breach, their galvanic rifles spitting streaks of light into the defenders. The air became a maelstrom of ion fire, shrapnel, and static screams. But for every heretic felled, another emerged, their flesh-metal bodies animated by warp-born power. The corrupted Castellan robots lumbered forward like titanic executioners, their fists crushing Skitarii as easily as parchment. Kelric's voice echoed again. Bring down their gods. Break their machines. Let nothing rise from this ruin. The Loyalist, Legio Invicta Titan Imperius Rex, advanced through the spire's outer wall with a single, earth-splitting step. Its plasma annihilator belched a sun-bright beam, vaporizing 100 meters of corrupted steel and flesh alike. The defenders retaliated with a corrupted warlord titan, its frame wrapped in demonic flesh, its carapace wreathed in warp fire. The duel between them shook Mars to its core, each blow a cataclysm, each step a death knell for those caught in their shadows. Inside the spire, Skitarii kill teams carved their way toward Varzun's sanctum. Hallways twisted and warped under their feet, reality bending to the will of the demon spirit. Vox signals fractured into maddening whispers, but they pressed on, guided by the iron faith in the Omnissiah's purity. Kelric, piloting his Ordinatus engine, rammed directly into the spire's heart. The blast doors crumpled like foil beneath its drills and energy lances. Bursting into the sanctum, Kelric beheld Varzun, a towering amalgamation of flesh, brass, and demonic ichor, plugged directly into the spire's core. You cannot kill me, Kelric, the heretic spat, his voice layered with the harmonics of 1,000 corrupted machine spirits. For I am no longer a man, but the machine god made perfect. Kelric responded by overloading the Ordinatus's primary cannon. The beam of annihilation tore through Varzun's body, ripping him from the spire's core. In his place, the demon spirit screamed as the binding snapped. Reality buckled, and a surge of warp energy tore the sanctum apart. Outside, the spire began to collapse. its upper levels folded in on themselves, the sky above torn by warp lightning. Loyalist titans turned their weapons to maximum output, ensuring nothing remained but molten slag. As the structure fell, a final data burst from Kelrick's systems was transmitted to the entire Loyalist host. The spire is fallen. Mars is ours again. Praise the Omnisire. When the dust settled, the iron spire was gone. Only a scorched crater remained, its edges glowing with the last embers of the battle. Thousands of Loyalists lay dead, their names entered into the Mechanicus' eternal data shrines. Yet the cost was accepted without hesitation. Mars had been purged of the greatest heresy since the days of the Horus heresy itself. But deep beneath the ruin, in the vaults untouched by fire or steel, a fragment of Varzoon's consciousness lingered, encoded within a shard of corrupted data steel. It waited, patient and silent, for the shattered citadel of Caliban's last fortress groaned under the weight of its own ruin. The once proud bastion of stone and ceramite, carved into the black mountains like the bones of some ancient beast, now lay half consumed by fire and void bombardment. Its towers leaned at broken angles, its great gates torn open by the force of betrayal. The air was choked with dust, smoke, and the acrid tang of burnt ozone. Lion Eljonson stood at the heart of the devastation. His ornate warplate was battered and scorched, its once pristine green enamel scarred with deep rents where blades and bolter shells had found their mark. His blade, the lion sword, was slick with the blood of those who had once called him brother. Around him, the echoes of war still lingered. Bolter fire in the distance, the roar of engines, the muffled cries of the dying. This was not how it was meant to end. For days the world had burned. Luther's rebellion had spread like a cancer through Caliban's ranks. Those loyal to the Lion fought with desperate ferocity, but the traitors had numbers, fortifications, and a terrible advantage. The heart of their resistance was in the very halls where the dark angels had once trained, feasted, and sworn their oaths. The Lion's voice was low as he spoke to the small cadre of survivors at his side. This fortress will not stand much longer. The bombardment will see to that. We take the inner keep, cut off the head, and the serpent dies. They moved through the shattered corridors, their footsteps echoing in chambers once filled with the hymns of unity. Every corner was a battlefield. Fallen knights lay strewn beside broken statues of imperial saints, their features blasted away by plasma fire. In the flickering light of burning banners, the Lion's expression hardened. These walls had been his sanctuary. Now they were the tomb of his dreams. The final gates loomed ahead, massive slabs of adamantium, scorched black from repeated melter charges. They opened with a shriek of tortured metal, revealing the grand throne hall beyond. At the far end stood Luther. The man who had once been the Lion's most trusted companion sat upon the great stone throne, not with arrogance, but with a stillness that was almost worse. His armor was blackened, dented, the sigils of the dark angels defaced. His eyes met the Lion's across the long hall, and in that gaze there was no surprise, no fear, only a quiet, terrible certainty. "Brother," Luther said at last, his voice carrying through the ruined hall, "you should never have returned." The Lion advanced, his steps measured, "and you should never have betrayed me." Luther's laugh was bitter. "Betrayal? Is it betrayal to save our world from the chains you brought here? From the Emperor's leash? The Emperor's light is the only thing that could have saved us," the Lion roared, his voice echoing like thunder. "You damn all we have built for your pride." "No," Luther said, rising from the throne. "I damn it for freedom." The air between them seemed to crackle with unseen power. Luther had been changed by something dark and ancient, his voice tinged with a resonance that was not entirely his own. The warp whispered through the stone of the hall, coiling around the pillars like serpents. Without another word, the lion charged. The clash was like the meeting of two storms. The lion's blade sang in a flurry of strikes, each blow meant to end the fight swiftly, but Luther met him with inhuman speed, his power fueled by the warp's unnatural strength. Steel rang on steel, sparks flying with each collision. The floor cracked under the force of their blows. They fought through the hall, across the dais, down the steps, between the shattered statues of heroes long dead. Each strike carried the weight of years of brotherhood, now twisted into mortal enmity. The lion's mind was a storm of rage and sorrow. Luther's was a cold, focused certainty. You were always the Emperor's hound, Luther snarled between blows. Chained, blind to the truth. And you, the lion spat, were my brother. And now you are nothing. The fight raged until the walls themselves seemed to shake, not from their blows alone, but from the thunder of orbital fire. The Imperium's fleet had arrived, and Caliban's skies were tearing open under the storm of its guns. A great explosion rocked the hall, hurling both warriors apart. The lion staggered to his feet, his armor smoking. Luther rose more slowly, the light in his eyes burning brighter, unnatural and unholy. "This is not over," Luther said, his voice a whisper that carried like a shout. "You cannot kill me. You cannot kill what I have become." The warp seemed to surge, the air distorting around Luther. The lion charged once more, but in a heartbeat, reality itself twisted, and Luther was gone, swallowed by the storm. The hall was collapsing. The lion stood alone before the shattered throne, his breath ragged, his blade dripping with blood that was not enough to end the war. Around him, the fortress crumbled, the skies above ablaze with the wrath of the Imperium. Caliban was dying, and so, in that moment, was the soul of the First Legion. The lion turned from the throne and walked into the fire. The fires of the siege had dimmed, but the embers still glowed in the heart of the palace. The throne room, once a place of unmatched imperial grandeur, was now a mausoleum of shattered marble, scorched banners, and silence so deep it felt alive. Sanguinius stood there, not as the glorious angel of Baal, but as a man who had carried too much for too long. His wings hung low, the once brilliant white feathers now stained with soot, and the dried blood of battles unnumbered. The Emperor's light still lingered faintly in the chamber, his psychic presence a dim warmth on the edge of perception. But it was no longer the roaring blaze it had been. For Sanguinius, the absence was sharper than any blade. He had given all, fought against fate itself, and yet the war had taken everything from him. The Horus heresy had ended, but the cost had hollowed the Imperium. The surviving warriors of the 9th Legion stood at the edges of the hall, their crimson armor dulled with ash. They were statues in every sense, motionless, wordless, their eyes locked on their Primarch. Some clutched their weapons as if afraid to let go. Others simply stood in silent grief. The air was thick with the psychic echo of the death screams from the battlefield, an aftertaste of despair that clung to the walls. Sanguinius spoke at last, his voice low and raw. "We have won," he said, though the words felt false even as he spoke them. "But this is not victory. This is survival." Ascaelon, captain of the Sanguinary Guard, stepped forward. His golden armor was battered beyond recognition. One wing of his helm bent and scorched. "My lord," he said, his voice steady but lined with exhaustion, The Imperium yet stands because of you. The blood we have shed is not in vain." Sanguinius turned to him, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "If it is not in vain, then it must mean something. But what meaning can there be, Askelon, in a galaxy that only knows how to consume itself?" Outside the shattered palace walls, the night sky over Terra was thick with drifting wreckage. Broken starships glimmered like dead constellations, and the bones of titans lay in heaps where they had fallen. From the ashes of the siege, scavengers already picked at the remains, both human and machine. The warlords who had survived Horus's fall were already whispering of the next conflicts to come. Sanguinius knew the truth. This peace was nothing but the pause between storms. He could feel the warp pressing against reality's fragile skin, eager to bleed through. The Chaos Gods had been denied their ultimate prize, but they were not defeated. They never would be. Askelon bowed his head. "We will stand ready, my lord. Whatever comes, we will face it." For a moment, the Primarch said nothing. Then he stepped forward, placing a hand on his captain's shoulder. "No, Askelon, you will face it. I will not." The captain's head snapped up, alarm flashing in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Sanguinius's gaze turned toward the distant stars. "The visions have not left me. I have seen the path ahead, and it is steeped in shadow. My part in this war is done, but the Imperium's trial is only beginning. The sons of Bel must endure without me. My fate is already written." A tremor passed through the chamber. To the warriors of the 9th Legion, it felt as though the very air had grown heavier. None dared to speak. At last, Sanguinius turned to his brothers in arms. "Hold fast to what I have taught you. Protect the innocent, even when it seems impossible. Do not let the darkness take you." His wings lifted slightly, catching the faint glow of the fractured light streaming in from above. "And remember this, glory fades, but honor endures." Without another word, he walked toward the great doors, each step echoing like the tolling of a bell. The warriors parted in silence. None tried to stop him. Beyond the palace, the wind carried the acrid scent of fire and the quiet sobs of the wounded. The Angel of Blood stepped into the night, his silhouette framed by the ruin of the Emperor's realm. The world seemed to hold its breath as he disappeared into the shadows, and in the throne room, Askelon stood alone, staring at the empty doorway, knowing that the galaxy had just lost more than it could ever comprehend. The ash-choked skies of Terra bled crimson with fire and smoke. A funeral shroud draped over the last days of the galaxy's brightest sun. The siege had stretched into its final agonizing hours. Every breath was a contest against the choking haze, every heartbeat a drumbeat closer to the end. And in the shadow of the palace's golden spires, Sanguinius knew the moment had come. For days, visions had gnawed at the edges of his mind, futures of ruin, splintered timelines of hope and despair. All paths led to the same door. The War Master, Horus, brother, betrayer. The angel stood alone on the scorched battlements, his armor battered and dulled by war, wings matted with soot and blood. Yet still, he radiated a beauty that even the corruption of the age could not erode. He turned his gaze skyward, past the blazing arcs of orbital fire, to the nightmare silhouette of the vengeful spirit, Horus's flagship, blotting out the stars. Somewhere inside, the heart of the war beat, and he would go to stop it. The Emperor's last command inside the command chamber, The Emperor's voice was low but heavy with finality. "You cannot win," he said, and Sanguinius heard not doubt, but knowledge. "I know," the angel replied. "Then why go? Because if I do not, you will face him without the chance you need." There was no more to be said. The Emperor placed a hand upon Sanguinius's shoulder, a gesture that bore the weight of millennia. Neither spoke of the love between them. Such things were understood without words. Boarding the beast, Sanguinius's journey through the ruin of space was like passing into a waking nightmare. Teleportation had once been a clean strike. Now, amid the warp storms that swirled around the vengeful spirit, it was a trial of will and soul. Reality bent and screamed. Shapes with too many limbs whispered in voices like shattered glass. He ignored them all. When he emerged, it was into the heart of a vessel defiled. The once proud decks were strewn with the corpses of loyalists and traitors alike, their blood mingling in pools that reflected the madness of the warp. Brass runes burned upon the walls, leering demons flickering in and out of reality. Each step forward was a battle, against the ship, against the voices, against himself. The final confrontation he found Horus in the Strategium. Once the War Master had been a giant of nobility, the chosen of the Emperor. Now he was a god in mockery of man, his form swollen with the gifts of chaos. Armor like molten obsidian clung to his twisted body, and his eyes burned with a light that was not of this universe. "Sanguinius," Horus said, his voice a chorus of mockery and welcome. "Horus," the angel replied, wings unfurling despite the pain. "You know why you are here. You've seen the truth. The Emperor's dream is a lie. Join me, and together we will rule as brothers, not slaves." For a moment, the weight of centuries between them threatened to sway him. But then he remembered the cities burned, the legions broken, the billions slaughtered in the name of this truth. "I came here to stop you," Sanguinius said, drawing his blade, "even if it cost my life." Horus smiled, a predator's smile, and the Strategium became a battlefield. The struggle of gods. The clash was titanic. Blades screamed against each other, the force of their strikes shattering consoles and sending shockwaves through the chamber. Horus's blows were the weight of planets, but the angel's speed and grace kept him alive. Wings flashed, a blur of white and gold, darting between hammering strikes that could split ceramite and bone alike. Every move cost him. His body screamed with old wounds, his vision swam with exhaustion, yet his will held. He struck deep, his sword biting into Horus's armor. But the War Master laughed, unfeeling. Warp sorcery twisted the air, hurling Sanguinius back. The angel rose again. Blood streamed from a rent in his armor, but he pressed on. This was not a battle to survive. It was a battle to delay. The breaking point. At last, Horus caught him. A gauntleted hand, larger than a man's torso, clamped around Sanguinius's throat. Bones cracked under the pressure. The angel's blade fell from his hand, skittering across the floor. Horus lifted him, studying him like a broken relic. "You could have been so much more," Horus said. "I am..." "Enough," Sanguinius rasped. Then, with a roar that shook the ship, Horus broke him. Wings snapped, armor crumpled, and the angel of Baal fell in a ruin of blood and feathers. The War Master let his body drop to the deck, lifeless, yet still serene. The vision fulfilled. In that final instant, Sanguinius saw it all. Not in the cold detachment of prophecy, but in the warm certainty of truth. His death would give the Emperor the moment he needed. It would not save the galaxy, but it would save something. And in the grim darkness to come, even that sliver of hope was worth the price. The vengeful spirit trembled as the Emperor's presence entered. Horus turned from the body of his brother to face the master of mankind. Behind them, the pale feathers of Sanguinius lay scattered across the deck like snow. The angel of blood had fallen, but his sacrifice would echo for 10,000 years. The fires of the final battle still burned across the blackened fields of Cygnus Prime. Sanguinius stood upon a ridge of shattered stone, his white wings ragged and bloodied, each feather matted with the lifeblood of brothers who had fallen around him. The once golden armor of the angel was now tarnished, dulled by the grime of war and cracked by the hammer blows of demons. The wind carried the stench of ash and rot, mingled with the copper tang of blood. Below, the remnants of the blood angels fought in desperate pockets of resistance, surrounded on all sides by the crimson tide of the foe. Demonic banners fluttered in the firelight, their shapes writhing unnaturally, as if alive. Yet Sanguinius did not move to join them immediately. His gaze was fixed upon the horizon, where a towering shape of shadow and flame began to emerge, the one he had known would come. Kabanda, the arch-bloodthirster, stepped into the mortal plane once more. The beast's horned skull grinned with the certainty of vengeance, the air around it shimmering with heat and raw hate. His massive axe dripped with the essence of 100 slain Astartes, and in his burning eyes lay the promise that this time the duel would end in the angel's death. Sanguinius's heart was heavy, not with fear, but with the knowledge of inevitability. "So it ends," he whispered to the ruins, his voice carrying no triumph, only resignation. The arch-bloodthirster bellowed, a roar that made the ground tremble and the sky shiver. "Twice we have met, angel, and twice have I tasted your defiance. Now I will taste your soul." Sanguinius leapt from the ridge, his great blade drawn in a single graceful motion. The silver edge caught the dim light of the burning sky, momentarily pure amidst the filth of war. Wings spread wide, he descended like a falling star toward the beast. Their clash shook the earth. The demon's axe met the angel's blade with a crack of thunder, a shockwave that knocked lesser warriors from their feet. Sparks and blood flew together as the two titans exchanged blow for blow. The angel's movements were swift, flowing, each strike born of centuries of battle. Yet Kabanda's strength was a thing of nightmare. Every swing of his axe could shatter a fortress wall. Still, Sanguinius pressed forward, his mind focused on only one thought. If he could bring the beast down, perhaps his sons might live another hour. But the bloodthirster was not alone. From the smoke came a second wave. Demons by the 100, clawed and howling, swarming toward the blood angel's last line. Sanguinius felt their presence without looking, the psychic pressure like a rising tide of knives. "Go," he roared to Captain Ralderon and the remaining brothers nearby. "Hold the line. Buy them time to fall back." Ralderon hesitated, knowing what his Primarch's words meant, but Sanguinius's gaze brooked no argument. The captain saluted and withdrew, rallying what remained of the company. Now the angel and the arch-bloodthirster stood alone, surrounded only by the corpses of the fallen. Kabanda laughed, the sound a deep, tearing growl. "Noble sacrifice, little god, but you bleed, and your blood sings to me." Indeed, the angel was slowing. Cuts crisscrossed his form, his strength waning. But even as pain lanced through him, his resolve only hardened. He lunged, his blade piercing deep into the demon's side, drawing a scream of fury. The bloodthirster retaliated with a sweeping blow that shattered the angel's breastplate and hurled him to the ground. His wings flared, trying to carry him back to his feet, but Kabanda was already upon him. The axe descended, only for Sanguinius to catch the haft in both hands, halting it inches from his face. The effort strained every fibre of his being. Blood poured from his lips as he forced himself upward, shoving the weapon aside and driving his sword toward the demon's throat. It struck home, but the beast did not fall. Instead, Kabanda's other hand closed around the angel's body, lifting him as if he weighed nothing. "You are strong," the demon snarled, "but not enough." The claws pierced through armor and flesh alike. Sanguinius felt the cold of the warp seeping into him, draining his strength. Visions flashed before his eyes. His sons falling to madness, their wings blackened, their faces twisted with rage. He saw the walls of the imperial palace and the shadow of another greater doom waiting for him there. With the last of his will, Sanguinius struck once more, his blade severing one of Kabanda's horns. The bloodthirster howled in pain and rage, flinging the angel away. The impact drove the breath from his lungs. He lay upon the ashen ground, staring up at the roiling sky. Around him, the battle was ending, not in victory, but in slaughter. Kabanda advanced, wounded yet unbowed. "Your defiance ends here." Sanguinius smiled faintly, blood staining his teeth. "Perhaps, but I will see you again, monster, and when I do, one of us will not leave." The demon hesitated, perhaps sensing something in those words, a truth not bound to this battlefield. With a growl, Kabanda turned away, leaving the angel broken but alive. When the blood angels finally reached him, they found their Primarch kneeling amidst the corpses, his sword planted in the ground before him, wings folded like those of a dying bird. His eyes burned still with purpose. But the cost of the battle was etched into his very soul. He had lived, but Cygnus Prime had been lost. And deep within, Sanguinius knew the real war had yet to come. The skies above Cygnus were a shroud of blood-red haze, the heavens themselves weeping crimson as if the stars mourned the fate of the angel. The world had become a mausoleum of broken dreams, a grave for both loyalty and rebellion. Across the shattered plains and burning citadels, the sons of Sanguinius fought their last battles, not for victory, but for honor, to etch their defiance into the stone of eternity before the abyss swallowed them whole. Sanguinius stood at the center of the ruined capital, his white wings blackened at their tips by ash and fire. His armor, once the golden herald of hope, was cracked and smeared with the blood of both friend and foe. The halo of light that once seemed to follow him dimmed under the shadow of the fate he had foreseen so many times in prophetic dreams. His death, his fall, and the corruption that would claim his sons. Before him lay the enemy. Demonic hosts swarming like a tide of nightmares, their forms shifting and writhing in mockery of flesh. They whispered promises, sang songs of damnation, and laughed with voices that sounded like the screams of dying worlds. At their head was the Crimson Seraph, a greater demon clad in wings of molten brass and wielding a spear that pulsed with the stolen life force of 1,000 souls. "My angel," the demon crooned mockingly, "you stand alone. Lay down your blade and I will grant your sons eternity. They will never wither, never fall to madness." Sanguinius's gaze was calm, but in his chest raged a storm. He knew the truth. The price would be far greater than the demon's honeyed words suggested. His sons would indeed live forever, but as hollowed shells of rage and hunger, slaves to the blood god. And so he stood, the tip of the blade encarmine lowered but unyielding. "You speak of eternity as if it is a gift," Sanguinius said, his voice quiet yet carrying over the battlefield. "But eternity without honor is a curse heavier than death." With a roar, the demon lunged. The clash was titanic. Steel and warp-forged bone striking with the force of colliding meteors. Every blow shook the ground. Every parry sprayed sparks that hissed upon the blood-drenched earth. The demon's spear sought his heart. Sanguinius's blade sought its own justice. Around them, the battle turned into a maelstrom of slaughter, legionaries and demons locked in desperate combat. Yet even as he fought, Sanguinius felt the toll. His wings ached, his limbs were heavy, and the whispers in his mind grew louder. The red thirst clawed at the edges of his soul, urging him to give in, to embrace the same savagery he had fought so long to control. His vision blurred, and for an instant he saw himself as the demon promised. A red-eyed monster, his wings soaked in gore, ruling over an empire of the damned. But then he remembered the faces of his sons as they once were. Noble, bright-eyed warriors who had followed him across the stars, not out of fear, but love. He remembered terror, the golden light of the Emperor's dream, and the oath he had sworn before the master of mankind himself. He would not break it now. With a final cry, part roar, part prayer, Sanguinius drove the blade in carmine through the crimson seraph's chest. Warp light burst from the wound, the demon's scream splitting the air like a rift in reality. But as the creature fell, so too did the angel. Blood gushed from a dozen wounds, his wings hung in tatters. Around him the demons faltered, then began to dissolve into the ether, banished but not destroyed. The sons of Sanguinius rushed to their father's side. Captain Azkaelan knelt beside him, his voice breaking. "My lord, the enemy flees. You have saved us." Sanguinius smiled faintly, though it was tinged with sorrow. "No, Azkaelan, I have delayed them. The true battle still awaits, far from here, upon the walls of terror." His eyes, once as bright as the dawn, now dimmed. "You will go on without me. You will remember the man I was, not the monster I could have been." The world around him seemed to fade. He could no longer feel the cold wind or smell the smoke of burning cities. There was only light, soft, golden and warm, like the first sunrise on Baal. He heard the distant echo of the Emperor's voice, calling him home. With one last breath, the angel whispered, "For the Emperor, always." And then Sanguinius, the angel of blood, was gone. In the years to come, bards and chroniclers would sing of his sacrifice. Some would say that his death shattered the hearts of his legion. Others that it became the fire that kept them from falling entirely into darkness. But all agreed on one truth. Sanguinius had stood between humanity and the abyss, and though the abyss had claimed him, it had not claimed his soul. On Baal, the skies would forever carry the red hue of that final battle, a reminder that even angels bleed, and somewhere beyond the veil, the angel watched, his wings unbroken in the Emperor's light, waiting for the day his sons would join him, redeemed, whole, and free from the curse. The rise and ruin of Sanguinius was complete, but his legend would never die.